3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this licensing hearing, this remote hearing, and welcome to everyone who's watching the webcast at home as well. Last week, we already covered agenda item 1 and 2, but we'll go back and do agenda item 2 again, introductions, just because it's not exactly the same people. I'm Councillor Melly and I'm chairing today's meeting. Councillor Looker and Councillor Galvin are also sitting on this subcommittee with me today. There's also a Democratic Services Officer, Fiona Young, and a Legal Officer, Jenna Pangley and Victoria Wardby in attendance as well. I'm just going to ask other people to introduce themselves as well. And could you introduce yourselves and also any witnesses that you have with you, please? We'll start with the licensing manager.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Leslie Cook, the licensing manager for the City of York Council.
Thank you. Good morning. And the applicant or whoever's representing the applicant.
Good morning. My name is Richard Arnott. I'm a solicitor with a firm called Ward Hadaway, and I'll be representing the CoOp this morning.
Thank you. Good morning. And we have a representative as well.
My name is Andrew Mortimer, and I'm joined today by my colleague Pippa Hepworth.
All right. Thanks very much. Right. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any interests to declare? No? All right, great. Me neither. All right then, agenda item 4, exclusion of press and public. So I'm going to propose that in the usual way, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the subcommittee's deliberations and decision making at the end of the hearing, because it considers that the public interest in excluding the public outweighs the public interest in that part of the meeting taking place in public under Regulation 14 of the Licensing Act 2003. We haven't got any sensitive evidence to consider that's been submitted, so I think we can hold the rest of the hearing in public. Do members resolve that?
Great.
Great. All right then, agenda item 5, the application. We're here to determine an application by the Cooperative Group Limited for a variation of a premises licence in respect to the CoOp on Hull Road. Can I just check that everyone has seen the agenda supplement that was published and circulated to everyone, I believe, on the 8th of October?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so you should all have seen the procedure for the remote hearing in writing. It was on pages 1 to 6 of the agenda pack. So hopefully you've all had a chance to see that and understand it. We're going to follow that procedure, except that the subcommittee, we aren't going to announce our decision today in the public meeting online. The decision will be communicated in writing to all parties and announced on the council's website within 5 working days, instead of us all coming back today into a public meeting. So in summary, the running order of proceedings is that the licensing manager will go first and present their report, and then I'll invite each party one by one to ask the licensing manager any questions or clarifications, and then each party in turn will represent their case and call any witnesses that they have as well, and everyone else will have the opportunity to ask questions, each in order. I'll call on people in order and you'll all have the chance to ask questions. And then finally, each party will then be able to summarise their case at the end, and we'll seek any final points of clarification, make sure we've got all the information we need and ask every question. Yeah, does everyone understand that procedure? Is that all? All right, great. Okay, so we'll start with the licensing manager. Leslie Cook, could you please present your report for us?
Thank you, Chair. This is the application for the variation of a premise licence for CoOp 102 to 104 Hull Road, York. This premises trades as a supermarket convenience store. The nature of the application is to allow for the extension of the supply of alcohol by 1 additional hour. So that would be from that additional hours from 11 p.m. till midnight. And the addition of late night refreshment, again for the period 11 p.m. until midnight. And the removal of the conditions are annexed to 2 of the current premises licence and replacing them with the conditions detailed in paragraphs 9 to 13 of the report. A full copy of the application can be found at Annex 1. A copy of the existing premise licence, which was granted on the 17th of July 2006, can be found at Annex 2. As part of the application, the operating schedule submitted by the applicant showing how the licensing objectives would be met can be found at paragraphs 19 to 13 on pages 8 and 9 of the report. I can confirm that this premises is not located within the Community Impact Assessment area and that the consultation process was carried out correctly. There are no representations before you today from responsible authorities. A relevant representation has been received from another party. Their details can be found at Annex 3 and their representation at Annex 4 on pages 39 and 40. A map showing the general area around the premises can be found at Annex 5. The committee has the following options when making your decision. Option 1, modify the conditions of the licence. Option 2, reject whole or part of the application. That's a brief overview of the report, Chair. And as you stated, an agenda supplement has been published with further information provided by the applicant.
Thank you very much, Leslie. So does the, on behalf of the applicant, Richard Arnott, do you have any questions?
No
To
questions.
ask the Great,
No.
thank you. And Andrew Mortimer, do you have any questions?
All of this time, thank you.
All right. Members of the subcommittee, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, I have a couple, if that's all right. I was just wondering what exactly is the licensable area, just because one of the conditions is CCTV at entrance and exit points, and I was just wondering if that's entrance and exit points to the shop or to the whole of the property, if that includes any car park area or anything like that. Just some clarification on exactly what that condition means, please.
The license, I'm sure that the applicant's agent will be able to give further information. The licensed area is the shop itself. I know that the premises does have a car park, but the licensed area is the actual shop.
Okay, so CCTV on entrance and exit points is just to the shop, to the licensable area, not to any
That's what I
surroundings.
would, yeah, that's what I would say, yes, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. All right, in that case, we'll move on to the applicant's presentation. If you could please address the subcommittee in support of the application. You've got a maximum of 15 minutes. You don't have to fill it. Make sure you give us all the relevant information, and then yeah, and call any witnesses. Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, I get paid by the hour, so I will be filling my 15 minutes if you don't mind, and I might go a little bit over, but I'll try not to. But what I won't do is take up any of your time this morning describing who the Co-op are. You'll be more than familiar with us, I'm sure. 5th largest retailer in the country, 2,500 stores, 80,000 people employed in food alone. We are the world's largest consumer cooperative with around 8.2 million members. We've operated a store at this particular site for, we think, around 15 years. And from the inquiries that I've made before, being a co-op, it was a Summerfield. So there's been a convenience store supermarket at the site for quite some considerable time. Being a convenience store, part of that convenience to our customers is to enable them to buy alcohol from us, as well as everything else that they might need, whether they're popping in for the family shop or topping up the fridge or the larder. Typically with a store of this size, alcohol, well, typically I can say exactly that the store, this particular store, alcohol represents less than 20% of our turnover. So if you do the maths, 80% of what we sell is food, household products, things like that. We already have, as you know, obviously a premises license, and that currently allows us to sell alcohol between the hours of 7 in the morning and 11 o'clock at night. This is not a dedicated off license in the sort of booze buster sense. It is a shop, a convenience stores, I've described it, with ancillary food sales, very, very common these days. Now, with so many stores and I think it's around 170 years of retail experience, we understand our responsibilities. We know what you expect of us, our neighbours, the responsible authorities, police, etc. And we invest a lot of time and effort in making sure that we don't let anybody down. Promoting the licensing objectives is obviously at the forefront of our mind at all time. Each region has a risk manager. In this particular area, the risk manager is a gentleman called Sean King, and Sean's job, amongst other things, is to liaise with the local community, responsible authorities and make sure that if there are problems, they are sorted out quickly. And he, together with training colleagues, will ensure that all of our policies and procedures, which we invest a lot of time in developing and deploying, are applied in store. One of the many ways that a store is judged is by how effectively it applies our policies and procedures, and obviously how we sell age-restricted products is very important in that assessment. CoOp, being the sort of organisation it is rather risk averse. And whenever I have meetings over at headquarters in Manchester, risk is a word that's mentioned very regularly, and we see getting things wrong as risk. So getting it right is as much about self-defense as anything else. It's really important to us. And entirely by way of background, I've produced some documentation, training documentation for you, just for your, I'm not going to go through it. I'm not going to test whether you've read it or not. It's there just for your information, but it gives you a flavour, I hope, of the depth to which we go to make sure that everybody gets things right. When a new member of staff starts, they have an induction process that takes typically 4 hours, at the end of which they sit an exam. They must pass that exam before they progress within the business. We also have another sort of level of supervision, and that's called the buddy system. And that's a term that we take from diving. So a new member of staff would have allocated to them a new best friend, if you like, and that person's responsibility is to keep an eye on them, but also to be a sounding board. If you, as a new member of staff, any questions, you can turn to your buddy first of all. But on top of that, we have another layer, and that's what we call lockdown, and we've been using that word for years. And basically, what happens, in summary, is that new member of staff gets their training, they pass their exam, they're not allowed to sell alcohol. It's only until such time as the buddy is satisfied, but more importantly as well, the store manager releases them from lockdown. So it's all well and good knowing what the law is, but we have to be satisfied that you're robust enough to apply it. And that whole process from start to finish typically takes around 4 weeks. So you can't sell alcohol throughout that period. It's only when you've passed your exam, but also that we're happy that you'll do what is expected of you, will you be then allowed to sell alcohol. And if at any time we lose confidence in you, whether you've been with us for a year or 30 years, you will be tipped back into lockdown. And it's your job then to satisfy us that you can be relied upon. And then whether, again, you've been with us for a short period of time or decades, you get 2 refreshers every year. If you fail those refreshers, lockdown. It's a really important process and an excellent way of supervision. CCTV, questions already been asked. Internally and externally, this store has 40 cameras throughout the trading area, as well as back of house, etc., etc. Staff, there are 29 members of staff. We have 5 personal license holders as well. So everybody gets the training that I've just described. But in addition, team leaders will be personal license holders, and we're a qualified course provider for that particular that qualification. Challenge 25. We were the first of the nationals to adopt Challenge 25. I mean, you'll be familiar with some of the older licenses you might have seen with Challenge 21. We're Challenge 25. Everybody else has followed us. So basically, that gives us additional room within which to make sure that we don't inadvertently sell alcohol to people who should not be able to buy it. The layout of the premises, easily supervised. You've probably seen the plans. I won't go through them. It's not really relevant to this particular application. Age-prompt tills as well. They are deployed throughout the estate. Now, when I started doing licensing many years ago, these things didn't exist. And the sort of push-button mechanical devices, everything within the store is barcoded. So when a bottle of wine, for instance, is to be sold, that bottle of wine is scanned through the till, and the till recognizes it as alcohol. And what happens then is there is a screen, very much like what we're looking at now, and that reminds the cashier of their responsibilities. And it's only when they've gone through a process and interacted with the screen does the till then allow that transaction to be completed. So effectively, every time a cashier wishes to sell an age-restricted product, alcohol, they are refreshed. So again, that's another way of ensuring that we don't get things wrong, and we do our very best to promote licensing objectives. So far as the community is concerned, clusters of stores have what's called a community pioneer, and it is their role. The forefathers of the CoOp movement, by the way, were called the pioneers. The community pioneers' role is to get stuck into local communities and to make sure that we support good causes. And I think it was last November, we distributed about £19 million nationally. So, £1,000 here, £500 there, sports clubs, schools, etc., etc. And locally, we support Town Hall Community Centre, Youth Rangers and Guides, and Bell Farm Social Hall as well. Those organisations that we support. They are refreshed every couple of years or so, and they are decided upon by our local members. So it's not that somebody from head office says this is what we're going to support. It's what our local membership decides, the causes that are important to them. Now, the application before you, as you've heard, is to add alcohol sales to midnight, 1 hour. We already have 11 o'clock. And the reason for doing that is this: we want to open our store a little later to midnight. And the reason for doing that is twofold. First of all, principally to accommodate online shopping, very popular now, Deliveroo. Obviously, the store has to be open for us to be able to do that. So that's the first thing. But secondly, because our customers are telling us that's what they want. There is a demand there for a little longer. You'll be familiar with the Section 182 guidance, Secretary of State's guidance, and that says at 10.15 that shops should normally, unless there's a very good reason based on licensing objectives, be able to sell alcohol throughout the periods that they would normally be open. So that's basically why we are extending, or would like to extend, our license by 1 hour to accommodate the fact that we would like to stay open later for 1 hour. We've also asked for late night refreshment. We're not selling or intend selling kebabs or pizzas or anything like that. That's simply because we've got a Costa coffee machine. And what the law says is that if you want to sell hot drink or hot food after 11 o'clock at night, you need late night refreshment as a licensable activity. So that's the only reason that we're asking for that. There's no other motive. We're not going to be selling other types of products. It's simply coffee, which obviously has to be sold hot. In addition, as well, as was mentioned in your licensing manager's summary, the conditions on the current license are a little old-fashioned. I won't say they're not fit for purpose, but they're not a modern standard. So we've taken this opportunity, this variation, to modernise the conditions, and you've seen the conditions that we've applied within your agenda, and they're on page 8 and 9. I won't go through them unless you think that is necessary. I think they speak for themselves, but they are conditions that we would normally apply to any modern co-op store. So we recommend them to you. We have no objections from the police or any responsible authority, nor do we have any objections from any residents, but we do have a single objection from the Hull Road Lib Dems focus team. Before discussing that representation in a little detail, it might be useful at this juncture just to briefly remind ourselves of the law. I do tread carefully. I know you've got Jenna and Victoria here, but the law basically is that it's up to objectives to convince you that there is evidence that we'll fail to promote the licensing objectives if you're kind enough to grant the variation to us. It's not a general discussion about the shop. And that's a really important point, because when I come on to the objection in a moment, I think a lot of what is said is really just a general reflection on us. Now, I say that because we have, and again, you'll be advised in closed session, we have the case TCG Manchester Bar's case, and that quite clearly says that, and His Honour Judge Higginbottom in that particular case said that when you're talking about a variation, which is what this is, it's not a general review of the license as a whole. All you're looking at, all you're focusing on, is the things that are to be changed and the likely effect of that change on the promotion of the licensing objectives. And that's what we need to limit ourselves to. We did try to assuage our objectives' concerns, and the meeting took place at the premises. Sean, the area manager that I've mentioned, and Eric, who's with us today, who's the store manager, did meet with Andrew and Pippa at the store, but unfortunately they weren't able to make. Well, I'm sure Andrew and Pippa will tell you what they thought of that meeting. We thought it was constructive, and we explained our processes to them, but it wasn't sufficient for them to withdraw, although we did invite them to do that. Now, turning to their letter, 8th of September, which is the representation. I don't know where it is on your agenda, so I won't quote the page. Yeah, you will have it before you. Excellent. Halfway down, the Home Office have issued guidance about selling hot food and drinks after 11 o'clock. It makes clear that there is a link between the sale of late night refreshments, alcohol, fuel, crime, and disorder. That's, I don't want to say that that's a misinterpretation, but what has not happened is that the rest of that sentence has been quoted. And what that talks about is takeaway places where people will congregate late at night. Alcohol, fuel, disorder is associated with, and I've been doing this job for a very long time, is associated with pizza places, kebab places, city centre takeaways, not places like this. And the Home Office guidance that Andrew quotes from does say nighttime, such as fast food takeaways where late night drinkers congregate. So I think he really ought to have given us the full quote if he's to rely on that, but it may well be that, well, upon reflection, he's not relying on that. CCTV, the proposed CCTV coverage of the entrance and exits. Well, we've got 40 cameras throughout the store and always have had. So we have very good coverage. We don't have coverage of the car park, which may well be a question that I'll be asked later, but we have no issues in the car park. Obviously, we can only put cameras where we're allowed to, data protection, that's important, and they are throughout the store itself, as you would expect. Proof of age, we do have a proof of age scheme, that's challenge 25, which is, I've already described it, and it's there within our conditions, so I'm not sure why that's being raised. Just returning one point on the car park, as Eric will confirm, people don't congregate in the car park now, and we're open until 11 o'clock. So we see absolutely no reason why they would congregate in the car park if we're allowed to stay open a little later. That being said, the car park is well lit. So you put yourselves in the shoes of a sort of furtive teenager up to no good, you're not going to congregate there because you're going to be seen. And our staff are there, and it's not the sort of place that people would congregate if they were up to mischief, we would say, and they don't do it now, so there's no reason why they would want to do it in the future, we would say. Complaints procedure, again, I mean, I go back to the point that I made about let's focus on the things that are changing, but we have a very, very comprehensive complaints procedure. And I've researched it in anticipation of this hearing. It's not that we propose to have a complaints procedure, as is suggested in the letter. We do have a complaints procedure. It's called a care line, and there are various stages to it. I can go through it in great detail. I've got all the training, what staff are supposed to do with a complaint. It may well be that if you want to ask Eric about it, he'll be more than happy to talk you through it. But we take complaints seriously. And in a sense, we welcome complaints. I know that sounds sort of counterintuitive, but it helps us improve and develop. Individual members of staff are required to take ownership of complaints and to deal with them as quickly as possible. But so far as the complaint procedure is concerned, Careline, information on Careline is on all of our CoOp products. It's on all of our till receipts. The information is there for anybody should they need it. And our staff are very approachable. And if you do have a complaint, you can make it directly to the staff and be escalated up to the store manager. And that's the process that we have throughout the estate, throughout the country, and it works really well. As I say, I can go into great detail, but I'm not going to take up any of my time doing that unless it's really important to you. Signage, Andrew talks about, required to display signs for my customers' residential area. Not a problem, we can do that. More than happy to do that, and we said that in the meeting that we had with him. Litter, we have bins, and part of the opening and closing procedure at any CoOp store is to tidy up. Obviously, we need a store that is attractive, otherwise people won't come to it, they'll just go somewhere else. So that's all part of our daily process anyway.
Mr. Arnott, you've now been speaking for more than 15 minutes. Is there any other information that we need to know when making our considerations that isn't already in the application or any of the other information we've already been provided?
I was just about to finish off by dealing with that one final point that Andrew makes about litter.
All right.
And that's simply, well, as I was saying, we have bins, etc., but bear in mind too that the Section 182 guidance does make it clear that licensees in any context can only be held responsible for things that they can control. So what people do away from the store is a matter between them and the law. But then again, we're not hearing any complaints about litter generated by us as a consequence of what we're doing now. So I can see, with all due respect, no reason why that would change, simply if you are kind enough to grant us that additional hour and late night refreshment, and also modernise the conditions. So there, Chair, members of the committee, that's my submission.
Okay, thank you very much. So the representative now has up to 5 minutes to ask questions if you have any, Mr. Mortimer.
No questions.
No questions. All right. Members of the subcommittee, do you have any questions? I saw Councillor Galvin's hand first.
Chairman, could I just ask Mr. Arnott, have you had any issues with antisocial behaviour on, I say, a scale of 1 to 10, which is probably easiest way of sort of putting it down. But have you had any previous problems with antisocial behaviour and people drinking in the car park, or the sort of behaviour that is possibly suggested by the representative?
Councillor, not to my knowledge, no, and I have made inquiries, but we've got Eric here, who's the store manager. Perhaps he could answer that question for us.
Morning. No, we haven't had any problems. I've been at the store for around 7 months now. I've never had any issues in the car park with drinking. Nothing like that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnott.
Councillor Looker, did you have a question?
Thank you very much. I was sort of, the area I was particularly interested in was the late night refreshment. Now, presumably, you're having to ask it because if you're selling coffee after 11 o'clock at night, I'm presuming you sell coffee throughout the day up to 11 o'clock at night, and your late night hot refreshment relates to nothing other than, is it tea and coffee, but it's a hot drink, is that right?
Councillor, the law requires us to have late night refreshment as a licensable activity on a licence if we sell hot food and drink after 11, between 11 o'clock.
That's what I thought, yes.
Okay.
That was my understanding. But you're not, as you said, you are not a fast food joint, because one of the big issues, certainly, I may be old-fashioned, around fish and chip shops was the amount of litter that descended when people walked away from the shop and left their litter as they went. But you are just really dealing with coffee cups, essentially.
Councillor, we're the co-op, we're not going to be anything else.
No.
All we have is our Costa machine. I mean, you can find these Costa machines just about on every street corner now, Gareth, all over the place. And we have one. And if we want to sell hot coffee, I guess probably the machine dispenses tea as well. We need late night refreshment. Simple as that.
Can I just clarify, is it one of those fully automated machines where the customer goes up to the machine and operates it themselves and it doesn't need a shop assistant or any member of staff to complete the sale or anything?
Eric, can you just confirm that?
Yeah, it's just the customer goes up, it's the machine they use themselves. It's just coffee and hot chocolate, what you'd find in any petrol station, really.
Okay, so can I just clarify, because we've got Jenna and Victoria on the call, is that, if it's fully automated, does that need a late night refreshment license?
So under 314 of the guidance, by being fully self-operated, that isn't licensable. Leslie, are you available? Can you comment on this as well?
Yes, I've just read section 3.14 as well. I mean, the staff involvement could be the fact that they take the payment at the till, because as far as I'm aware, the Costa machines are the ones I have used in petrol stations, etc. I may dispense my own coffee, but I have to go make a payment at the till to purchase the coffee, where some vending machines, you actually put your money into the machine for it then to dispense your coffee. So it could be argued that there is staff involvement because the staff has to take the payment for the drink.
Yeah. So
I'm sure Mr. Arnott would comment if he disagreed with those points.
No, I don't, but I take your point that the process is not necessarily fully automated. Is that correct, Eric?
Yeah, correct. Just obviously when they come to the till, they have to pay the customer unless they go through a self-serve where they sell it themselves.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else in the subcommittee have any further questions? Okay, so I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Section 15 of the application asks for standard opening times for the shop. I was just wondering if you'd mind explaining the answer given in the application there, the standard opening times you've provided.
Opening and closing times of a convenience store should not be prescribed by a premises license. That's the prevailing legal view. The reason for that is that those hours should be dictated only by planning. because it should not be the case that a premises license effectively prescribes the time at which we can start selling bread, milk and eggs, or for that matter, stop selling bread, milk and eggs. So on co-ops, all co-ops now, when we're making applications, we will not prescribe opening and closing times for that reason. There is a good legal argument as to why that should be the case, and that's why it's the right view.
So if in the future you were to open longer hours outside of the hours of the licensable activity, what measures do you have in place to prevent the sales of licensable, alcohol, whatever?
All of our tills are time locked, so that the till will not allow the sale of an age restricted product outside of the hours prescribed by the premises license. So we simply couldn't do it.
Okay, and that applies to the kind of self-service checkouts as well, if you have them now or in the future.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yes, so you've answered it in your in what you've said already, but I just wanted to clarify, because in sections 4 to 18 of the application, it's basically a long list of all the licensable activities, and you tick off which ones you want to apply for and which ones you don't, and lots of it's this kind of boxing, plays, that sort of thing. But you've ticked yes to changing the hours for alcohol, but no to the hours of late night refreshment. I just wanted to clarify that's definitely a typo.
No, because we're not changing late night refreshment because we don't have it yet. We're asking for it. So it's not nothing is changing. We are simply asking that you add that as a licensable activity to our license.
Okay, I think whoever filled it in might have slightly misunderstood the application. That's fine. I'm sure I had one more question. What was it? No, I've forgotten it. All right, we'll move on then to the representative, who now has 15 minutes to present your case, including any witnesses that you have with you as well, please.
Hi, Chair. Sorry, just to chip in. The representative got as much time as the applicant had to speak.
Right. Okay. Well, I timed it, so that's fine.
Brilliant.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Hopefully, Chairman, that will not be an issue. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee today. My name is Andrew Mortimer, and I'll be assisted by my colleague Pippa Hepworth to take you through our comments relating to the application from the Hull Road Co-op. To set the background, as members of Hull Road Ward Lib Dem focus team, we have spoken with local residents about this application, and we can tell the committee that there are a number of told us they are dead set against the Co-op plans. We haven't, however, objected in principle to the proposals, but we do think that more needs to be done to make them comply with your statement of licensing policy. The key issue for us is that Hull Road Co-op is located in the middle of a residential area. There are houses on all sides of the premises, and access to the site is from a residential street. The map on page 41 of the committee pack clearly shows the location. Our submission on pages 39 to 40 covers the areas when we are most concerned about. They are all set within the context of the Council Statement of Licensing Policy 2019 to 2024, and in particular, two key objectives: the prevention of crime and disorder and prevention of public nuisance. Looking at prevention of crime and disorder, as Rich has already mentioned, there is some Home Office guidance there that does link the sale of late night refreshments to alcohol-fueled crime and disorder. I'll come back to that a bit later on, because I think it's important that we understand what the Co-op are proposing to do is one thing, but what the license gives them the ability to do is a completely different thing. And therefore, I think we need to cover both of those issues. So within the, we also think there's an increased likelihood of disorder from anybody wishing to buy alcohol between 11 p.m. and midnight. And I think at the moment, the Co-op actually currently only operates till 10 p.m. I think it might be something to do with the pandemic, but certainly between 11 p.m. and midnight, which they don't have a license for. Our question is, how many people are going to go into the Co-op at that time to buy alcohol, let's say 1/4 to midnight, who have probably not already had a drink and have run out and are looking for a top-up. It's not a time you do normal alcohol shopping. It's not part of the weekly shop at 1/4 to midnight. So within the residential area where the Hull Road Co-op is located, there's a real potential for noise and disturbance at a time when people will be at home trying to sleep. So the applicants have put forward a number of conditions as part of their application. We don't think that most of them have gone far enough to comply with your statement of licensing policy. And I'll take you through the points that we've raised in our submission. So firstly, looking at CCTV. In addition to the applicant's proposal for CCTV coverage of internal areas and the entry and exit, we believe there should be coverage of the external areas where customers and others can congregate. This is required under para 7.12 of your licensing policy. It's important in this location because there is a large sheltered area outside the store that could encourage people to hang around, especially when the weather is bad. You will note under the existing license on page 32 of your committee pack that there is a condition which requires camera locations to be agreed with the police. This could have covered the issue, however, it has now been removed from this application. Looking at the proof of age scheme, as Richard said, Pippa and I visited the CoOp last month. We had a very useful and I would say positive visit, and we certainly thank the CoOp for the opportunity and the time they gave us. We were shown the proof of age scheme, which is very comprehensive and does require does meet the requirements of your licensing policy. And I'm going to ask Pippa if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about what we saw when we visited the store.
Hi everyone. Eric went behind one of the tills and showed us how the Challenge 25 procedure works. And he showed us the till and what comes up on the screen. And this allowed us to understand the Challenge 25 policy, but we did think that that is comprehensive enough and does cover the requirements of the CoOp's licensing policy.
Thanks, Pippa. Now looking at the prevention of public nuisance, I think it's important here to look at, again, your statement of licensing policy. And the primary statement in that says that applicants need to focus on the effects of licensable activities on people living and working in the area around the premises. So it's a key part of your policy. But as far as we can see, the only thing the CoOp have done on this particular aspect, certainly looking at their application, is to talk about having a complaints procedure. So there's been nothing proactive to meet your requirements of addressing the needs of local people, just there's something in place for when there's a problem. When Pippa and I visited the store, we asked about the complaints procedure, and we were told that they had a customer care plan which required an approach to the store manager. And again, if maybe I hand over to Pippa, she'll explain a little bit about what we were told.
Hi, so we were told by Sean that customers could complain using the receipts or by approaching the store manager. However, this will require, if they're like, if local residents did want to complain and say the issue was noise and disturbance, how we were talking about how would then the individual, the resident, be able to complain if, for example, the noise and disturbance was outside the door, because they won't be able to, if they didn't have a receipt or they couldn't go in and talk to the store manager, how would they be able to complain in that case?
Thanks, Pippa. I've had a look through the CoOp's website as well to see what they have in the way of a complaints policy. And there is something about an online complaints form for the stores, but as Pippa says, it requires information from a receipt. But obviously the complaints may not come from a customer, and there's a question about, well, how would the CoOp handle complaints that come from a local resident who may not have a complaint as in the context of the customer? So I think there's a real question here. And I don't think we came away thinking that we understood what the complaints procedure was. And I'd be interested if the CoOp actually could explain a little bit maybe about what their complaint procedure is, more than just approaching the store manager. Because if you want to complain, you want to know what you're going to complain about and how to do it. And there just doesn't seem to be any process there. So we think as a minimum, the CoOp should have a clearly accessible and understood complaints procedure that people can actually use, because at the moment that doesn't seem to exist to us. There are a couple of other areas that, again, Richard mentioned that we think are important here. And again, they link directly to your statement of licensing policy. One is on signage, and we believe there should be some appropriate signage to comply with paragraph 7.12, which requires prominent notices at exits asking customers to leave the area quietly. And certainly we have those in local pubs and such like. And if people are leaving a pub at 10, 11 o'clock at night and have to leave quietly, if they then go into the CoOp to buy alcohol to take home, you would think equally they should be asked to leave quietly as well. And then the last thing is litter. And again, there is we think there should be a requirement for the application to clear up litter outside the premises, again, as per your licensing policy 7.12. So in summary, I don't think that any of our suggestions are unworkable or place too great a demand on the applicants. Indeed, we think that will better help the applicant meet the requirements of your licensing policy and take into account the impact that it may have on local residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does the applicant's agent have any questions to ask of the
I don't have any questions, but I have been invited to explain the complaints procedure in greater detail. I'm more than happy to do that now, if that would assist you.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity for questions has been and gone, but I do think that we need to hear, even if it doesn't fit quite within the procedure, we do need to hear everything and make sure we've got all the information we need. So if you are happy to explain it some more, I think now is okay to do that.
Yeah, reading from an email that I received from a senior individual within CoOp. We would always encourage neighbours to speak to the store management team to resolve, this is talking about complaints. But if they don't feel that they can or wish to escalate further, then they can contact CoOp Careline. There are numerous ways to contact Careline: web form, written, telephone, social media. Contact details are readily available: receipts, all CoOp branded products, web page. Stores can call Careline on a customer's behalf. This tends to happen, for example, if there is a product complaint in store that needs escalating. Careline will escalate complaints to relevant store area managers depending on the nature of the complaint. A report is then sent to each area manager on a weekly basis. In some cases, complaints are further escalated or to various teams within the CoOp. It should be noted that we see complaints as positive. We have a highly successful customer feedback survey, Your Store, Your Say, where customers are actively encouraged to complete regarding their store. This is staff training: deal with a customer complaint. If a customer complains in a store, make every effort to try and resolve the issue and make sure the customer is satisfied when they leave. You must, this is to our staff, take full ownership of resolving the complaint. Ask the management team to deal with the complaint if you're not sure what to do. Take the customer somewhere private to speak, away from other customers and colleagues. Make sure that the customer knows you want to help. Ask the customer what they'd like to do. Understand the customer's complaints, concerns, remain calm, listen. And there is other training, and I'm not going to bore you with that, but we take complaints very seriously. There are lots of ways of doing it. The easiest way, if you've got a complaint, whether you're a customer or not, is to pop in the store and speak to a member of staff. And there is a process then for that complaint to be escalated if necessary. So I don't accept that we don't have a good complaints procedure. We clearly do, but with all due respect, that's not really what we're discussing today. We're talking about.
Okay, thank you. I think you've answered the question and you've had your opportunity to speak. So thank you for answering that. Do members of the subcommittee have any questions for Andrew Mortimer? Councillor Looker.
One of the things I've been always advised with licensing applications is that by and large one should root one's findings and one's views on real situations, not hypothetical. And I'm wondering how many complaints you've registered in your discussions with local people that have been unable to or don't know how to deal with their complaint. I mean, are you basing this on some very real complaints that have come out of your discussions with people in the local neighbourhood? Because it's quite clear that the police and the people who would normally monitor behaviour and complaints like this have had no concerns or objections to make. So I'm just wondering whether this is, you're saying a lot of what ifs. Are you basing it on any reality that is a frustrated opportunity in the community?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think we are basing it on that. The challenge is that actually there is no evidence of the behaviour of customers between 11 p.m. and midnight, because they currently don't have any customers between 11 p.m. and midnight. So the question I guess I would ask you is, who do we think those customers are? Now, the CoOp have tried to say it's going to be mainly online. We think that's unlikely. We think it's more likely to be people coming back from the pub or a visit to town and calling on their way home to buy alcohol at that time. And those kind of customers are the ones that have already had a drink. And that's our concern is based around that. There are local residents we've spoken to, they just don't like the idea of this happening. There are no other shops in the immediate area that offer this service. So clearly the CoOp is going to become, in effect, a magnet to anybody that does want to purchase alcohol at these times.
With respect, Chair, I think that is still very rooted in hypothesis. I think one would have to argue that people behave very differently between 11 o'clock and midnight. Pubs throw people out at all sorts of hours these days. And I am not sure whether you are convincing me that people between 11 and midnight are very different from the people between 10 and 11. But I'll leave that at that for the moment.
Is that a question? Is that an invitation to add any more information, Mr. Mortar, if you have any more?
I don't think there's anything I can add, no.
No. All right. Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chairman. You made some comment about the type of person that would want to buy alcohol after 11 o'clock. I think Mr. Arnott fairly clearly pointed out that one of the markets that they're looking at is probably using people who use Deliveroo and other such organisations. So I think it ought to be pointed out that, again, none of us can guess or foresee what the customers are. So, you know, would you accept that what Mr. Arnott says, that perhaps there may well be more sales, perhaps or not, via the use of Deliveroo and other such services?
Thank you, Councillor. I think the answer is nobody knows at the moment, because it doesn't happen. And I think the concern that I have is the CoOp may have a particular kind of market in mind at the moment, but once they have this license permission that allows them to sell alcohol till midnight, they can do anything within the terms of the license. There will be no need for them to come back to you to do anything. So they may currently have in mind that the bulk of deliveries, bulk of purchases will be through online delivery services, but that would do nothing to stop an increased number of customers up to midnight.
Councillor Galvin.
I think that's not an unfair comment, but that comment also applies to most of the other objections that you've raised about people doing things that they shouldn't without any evidence. So thank you for that.
Is this a question? No. Okay. Any other questions from the subcommittee? Right, I just have one, if that's all right. You've said in your written objection, your original objection, that you would like for the complaints process or procedure to be shared with local residents rather than just made available on request. I was just wondering if you had any kind of specific ideas about how that could be achieved in a way that would satisfy you. Are you picturing it kind of going through every letterbox in the kind of surrounding residential area, or what sort of thing did you have in mind?
I think it was about kind of making it clear, because there is a bit of confusion here. If you want to complain, you've got to go to the CoOp and ask them, well, what's your complaint procedure so I can understand how I can complain. It would be a lot better, I think, from the CoOp's perspective, as well as local residents, if it was clearly understood, because if there was a clear complaints procedure, then both local residents would know how far any behaviour they might not be happy with would be allowed under it before that they would have to go and raise a complaint. What we don't want is people raising complaints for the sake of it. They need to clearly understand what the limits are. And at the moment, there isn't a clear complaints procedure.
Have you, I know you said you kind of took a visit to the store and talked to some of the management there. Have you also looked kind of on the website and that sort of thing that other people might use as their first port of call?
I did, and like I said, the only thing we found in terms of the complaints procedure for the CoOp stores, because it brings up lots of different CoOp group complaints procedure, but eventually after about 5 pages, you get down to something the search engine brings up about the CoOp stores, but it's all entirely customer based. It talks about requiring details of receipts. There's a number of drop-down boxes, and absolutely none of them bear any relationship to the fact there might be complaints about, behaviour of customers using the store. So I think that, yes, the CoOp may have a very good complaints procedure, but I don't think it's necessarily designed to operate in these circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galvin, did you have another question?
Yes, just to follow on, again, have you any evidence that people who wish to complain, not as a customer, but as a local resident, have you any evidence that they have not been able to complain?
No, we don't, Chair.
Okay, any final questions for the representative? No? Okay, right. So we'll move on to the next part, which is summaries. These go in the opposite order. The applicant goes last. So everyone will have 5 minutes to speak. And Andrew Mortimer, that's you first then, 5 minutes, if there's anything that you want to kind of summarise before we close.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, just thank you very much for listening to our representations. As I mentioned at the start, we're not against this application in principle. We just want better conditions that generally reflect the residential area in which the CoOp is located and which meet your requirements to consider the effect of people living in the area. We don't think the CoOp have done this at all, and that can clearly be seen by the fact that they've put nothing in their proposed conditions that reflects this. The applicant has told you that they only want to sell coffee from a vending machine and that most alcohol sales will be through takeaway services. This may be the case now, but once a licence is approved, it gives the applicant the ability to go beyond their current plans to fully utilise the scope of the approval given. It is therefore important that the conditions also cover the scope of the approval, as once the licence is issued, there's no going back. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Arnott, you have up to 5 minutes as well.
Entirely dispute the point that there's no going back. That's clearly just not right. If we get this wrong, and we won't, but if we were to get this wrong, we could be prosecuted and or reviewed. Remember what I said about risk. We will not put ourselves, our staff, our business, our reputation at risk. Now, the suggestion that the only people buying alcohol between 11 and 12 are people who may well be in drink already, having been kicked out of a pub, that's just wrong. We know that that's wrong. Our customers are asking for the premises to stay open a little later, and those are just our everyday customers. My wife's a nurse. She does silly shifts. She sometimes does her shopping very early in the morning or very late at night. It's when it's convenient for a customer. It's a convenience store. Now, it is correct that we probably won't be selling an enormous amount of alcohol between 11 and 12. But the job is of the objector to prove to you that if we were to do that, we would fail to promote licensing objectives. And councillors, you've both made the point that I'm about to make, which is that we're not interested in speculation. We have Her Honour Judge Black in the Thwaites case, which tells us that we can't dwell on that. It's an evidence-based process. At the moment, selling alcohol up to 11 does not cause problems for the community. So we're just asking for an additional hour. That's all. We've spent a lot of time on the customer care line complex. I've been doing CoOp work for 12 years now. I've probably done over 300 hearings, and I've never heard anybody complain about our care line. It is a good process. Simplest way for anybody to make a complaint is to walk into the store, grab a member of staff and say, I'm not happy, I'd like you to listen. And remember what I said about training, about individual members of staff taking possession and responsibility for complaints. That's the easiest way to get your complaint across if you've got one. But as Eric will confirm, and I think has already been highlighted, we're not being told about complaints about this store now. So there seems to me to be very little reason why, if you're kind enough to grant our application to us today, our variation, that should change. So that then is our submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and of course we'll consider evidence from all parties to ensure that all the licensing objectives are met. The onus isn't just on one party or the other. Do the subcommittee have any final questions or points of clarification or any other kind of bits of information you feel we need before deliberating? No, I have remembered the question that I was going to ask the applicant earlier and forgot about, so I'm just going to ask that now, just for clarification from you, if that's all right. My question was about music, and if you play music in the store, and if so, what's the nature of it? What sort of volume? What sort of hours of day? Do you have one of those kind of in-store radio type tannoys, that sort of thing?
Well, we don't have music as a licensable activity, so music would never be played as a licensable activity. We're not allowed to. So were we to ever do anything, it would have to only ever be background. We sometimes used to have co-op radio, but Eric, can you perhaps confirm whether we do have any form of radio music?
Yeah, it's still co-op radio. It varies throughout the day. Obviously, we can adjust the volumes, but we do, any sort of customer came in and said it was too loud, we wouldn't naturally turn it down. We do have a few customers that come in who are very sensitive to sound, so we just turn the radio off completely.
Yeah, so it can only ever be background in any event. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Again, I'll just check any other members of the subcommittee, any final questions or points of clarification? Okay, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Then we'll withdraw into a private session to deliberate and come to a decision. And we're not going to return to this meeting, so there's no need for anyone else to stay online or remain in this meeting. And then the decision will be communicated in writing to all parties and announced on the council's website within 5 working days. So thank you, everyone, for attending the hearing today and answering all our questions.